Close your eyes and listen. Imagine the silence of a city not being broken by war or fire or the shouts of a revolution, but by the rhythmic, relentless slapping of bare feet against stone. A sound that started with one woman, but soon it was coming from everywhere. You're walking down a street in 1518, and suddenly you realize the city isn't just crowded, it's contagious. If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. How much of history do you think is actually true? Because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you. These are the classified files, the buried evidence, and the forbidden stories that powerful forces spent decades trying to erase. If you are someone who refuses to accept the official story, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Dark History Files and join thousands of truth seekers uncovering what history tried to hide. Welcome back. This is the Dark History Files, and today we expose a truth that was never meant to be told. In the summer of 1518, Strasbourg rested beside the Rhine under an expansive sky. Timber-framed houses leaned over narrow streets, their upper stories casting jagged shadows upon the stone. Church spires pierced the skyline, anchored by a cluster of rooftops. Along the riverbanks, warehouses and workshops defined the boundary between land and water, a city forged by generations of labor and the steady pulse of daily trade. The season brought a warmth that saturated the air before the day matured. Breezes drifting through open windows carried the scents of river water, cut wood, and hearth fires. Distant cart wheels merged with the murmur of voices from secluded courtyards. A bell tolled, its resonance fading into the streets. Beneath the sun, the city existed in a tapestry of heat, sound, and lingering texture. As weeks advanced, the markings of summer deepened. Dust settled on well-worn roads, churned by the endless passage of feet and wagons. Merchants adapted to the heat, stalls opening at dawn. Boats arrived from distant shores to stir the riverfront, while city gardens flourished in the seasonal light. Nothing demanded alarm, yet subtle shifts quietly recalibrated the rhythm of the days. For the people of Strasbourg, the city was more than stone and timber. It was a framework of continuity. Familiar routes bound homes, workshops, and sanctuaries into a dependable pattern. Residents looked toward the future through the prism of harvests, trade, and faith. None could fathom that history would immortalize this specific summer. At the time, it felt merely like another chapter in a long-standing story, drifting beneath the warmth of the season. As summer intensified, Strasbourg maintained its rhythmic, structural routines. The city did not rouse at once. Activity emerged in layers. Bakers ignited ovens before dawn, scenting lanes with baking bread. Traders readied stalls, while laborers filtered toward workshops. Doors creaked open, exposing households already immersed in the mechanical tasks of the morning. The city gathered itself with methodical grace, rising in tandem with the heat spreading across the landscape. Marketplaces thrived on patterns carved by years of repetition. Farmers arrived from the countryside with grain and livestock. Buyers scrutinized goods, weighing needs against limited means. Conversations flowed between stalls, shifting from the price of wares to the whispers of distant news. A traveler might discern a cacophony of accents in a single passage, a stark reminder that this city stood at the nexus of far-reaching trade and communication. The Rhine remained central to the city's character. Barges navigated the current, linking Strasbourg to the horizon. Dock workers handled cargo while merchants charted values and destinations. From the banks, one observed the ceaseless exchange of departure and arrival. This flow of commerce infused the city with energy, yet remained steady and measured. It was a fixture of the environment, as ingrained in the collective consciousness as the church towers shadowing the rooftops. Beyond the thoroughfares, quieter pockets offered an alternative experience of summer. Small gardens occupied hidden patches behind dwellings. Children navigated alleys, while elders sought refuge in the shade during the peak of the day. Ancient vines scaled walls that had stood for generations. These private sanctuaries, absent from official records, were vital components of urban life, offering respite amidst the density of the city. The heat dictated behavior with subtle precision. Schedules shifted to evade the harshest sunlight. Strenuous labor was reserved for the cooler dawn. By afternoon, movement slowed and public discourse dimmed. The atmosphere favored patience over haste. Summer did not arrest the city's function. It merely tempered the pace at which life unfolded. Long before Strasbourg became synonymous with enigma, the season was already orchestrating the rhythm of existence through its persistent and encroaching warmth. Strasbourg's temperament shifted with one's path. At the core, vitality surged around markets and civic halls. Toward the periphery, the atmosphere dissolved into intimate lanes where daily existence unfolded on a human scale. Neighbors exchanged brief, knowing greetings. Such fleeting connections, absent from archives, forged the underlying fabric of the city. The architecture embodied centuries of organic evolution. Rather than singular design, structures accumulated, dictated by shifting utility and resource. Sturdy, timber-framed dwellings stood beside humble, utilitarian quarters. Artisans toiled in ground-floor workshops, their labor anchoring the city's commerce. Every facade and roofline bore the imprint of ancestors whose efforts remained etched into the landscape of 1518. Religious observance permeated the city's collective pulse. Church bells tolled at intervals, compartmentalizing the day. Their resonance drifted over rooftops, weaving through streets, reaching residents in their various labors. Some paused, others worked on, the sound a persistent backdrop. These bells served a dual purpose, marking time while binding individual lives to a shared, communal rhythm that extended far beyond the city ramparts. As daylight traversed Strasbourg, shadows migrated through courtyards and stone pathways. Morning light graced the upper stories before descending to the streets. By afternoon, the buildings cast cooling pools of shade against the encroaching heat. Residents adapted instinctively. Conversations drifted from sunlit thresholds to shaded corners, while merchants shielded their wares. These minor shifts signaled an ongoing, silent dialogue between the city and the season. At dusk, a final transformation took hold. Markets fell silent as households turned toward domestic life. Smoke curled from chimneys, drifting above the rafters. The din of trade yielded to muted voices and the rhythmic echo of late footsteps. Light ebbed against the horizon, surrendering to the dark. Strasbourg retreated into night, anchored in the familiar. No hint remained of the scrutiny history would soon impose. The city persisted in its routine, oblivious that future generations would one day scour these very streets for answers buried within an ordinary summer. Beyond the ramparts, the surrounding landscape anchored Strasbourg's survival. Roads radiated toward villages and fields, forming the vital arteries that fed the city. Daily, a steady current of people and produce bridged the rural and urban divide. Farmers delivered harvests to market. Merchants carried goods and intelligence back out. It was a symbiosis so ingrained that residents seldom paused to consider their absolute dependence on the lands beyond the gates. The summer of 1518 dawned in an era where existence balanced on the edge of uncertainty. Harvests dictated the divide between prosperity and destitution. Because weather governed crop yields and stability, It dominated the discourse. Practical concerns regarding supplies and seasonal shifts were not merely topics of interest, but the essential, mundane calculations of survival that occupied every mind during that sweltering season. Information moved at the pace of human travel. News arrived via merchant, traveler, and letter, circulating through taverns and marketplaces. Some accounts held truth, others mutated with every retelling. Fragments of distant events merged with local preoccupations in the city's public spaces. Strasbourg existed within a wider world, yet awareness of that realm arrived in fragments, filtered through memory and personal interpretation. Religious observances and festivals further compartmentalized the year. These dates carried established expectations, offering brief ruptures in the monotony of labor. Gatherings would animate the streets, only for the city to revert to its standard duties once the celebration subsided. Life progressed in cyclical, predictable patterns, a rhythm of work, worship, and rest that residents perceived as the immutable architecture of existence. Amidst these constants, Strasbourg projected an aura of unshakable continuity. Generations had matured and aged within this same labyrinth of stone. Countless personal dramas unfolded simultaneously, some marked by joy, others by struggle, largely confined to private lives. Looking back, the stillness of this moment remains haunting. The setting appears so tethered to routine, so profoundly ordinary, that the cataclysm lurking just beyond the threshold feels impossible to conceive. As summer intensified, the heat permeated Strasbourg's daily life. It clung to rooftops long past midday and persisted into the dusk. Residents learned to navigate the swelter rather than resist it. Windows remained open. Shaded nooks gained value as the sun reached its zenith. These minor, unobserved choices gradually coalesced into the atmospheric weight that defined the season. The city possessed a layered acoustic landscape. Hooves rhythmic against stone, cart wheels groaning under weight. Merchants vocalized their wares. Craftsmen labored behind open thresholds. Laughter occasionally spilled from courtyards. These sounds were neither constant nor chaotic. They ebbed and flowed, crafting a shifting backdrop to existence. A visitor lingering at a corner could hear the city articulating itself through 100 simultaneous, ordinary moments. By the river, activity adhered to generations of commercial precedent. Laborers handled cargo with practiced precision. Boatmen managed the pulse of arrivals and departures. The water captured the shifting light, offering a fluid contrast to the claustrophobia of the streets. While some passed the river unnoticed, others found sanctuary along its banks. The Rhine was both a vital resource and an ingrained feature of the city's identity. Time proved subjective. A merchant measured the day by transactions, a laborer by physical output and exhaustion. A child noted only the sun's crawl or the proximity of the evening meal. Thousands of distinct lives unfolded in parallel, each carrying private burdens and hopes. Together, they constituted the human tapestry of Strasbourg, a population tethered by geography yet divided by a multitude of untold stories. The city succumbed to another summer evening. Church spires presided over rooftops as the fading light softened the jagged contours of the streets. Smoke rose from hearths, signaling the night's approach. Labor subsided into domestic stillness. Nothing within this scene betrayed the proximity of historical anomaly. Strasbourg appeared immutable, as it had yesterday and as it would tomorrow. Yet, history often arrives in silence. Before the extraordinary strikes, there exists only the fragile calm of an ordinary world, waiting in the shadows. As the echoes of the market fade, the rhythm of the city begins to skip a beat. During the summer of 1518, the gaze of Strasbourg fixated upon a single woman, Frau Troffea. She emerged into the streets, moving with a cadence that arrested those nearby. Her path lacked destination. Her motion defied the expectations of observers. Beneath the summer sky, she paced, turned, and shifted in a rhythmic trance. Initially, she appeared merely as one inhabitant among many, yet her presence gradually detached itself from the standard pulse of city life. To witnesses, the scene was unsettling not for the presence of music, but for its absence. The environment remained mundane. The murmur of households, the grinding of cart wheels, the tolling of distant bells. Against this static backdrop, her movement formed a jarring contrast. Observers heard the familiar city, yet their eyes remained tethered to the woman whose actions seemed severed from the world around her. As the day waned, observers adjusted their behavior. Pedestrians slowed, some halted, stalled by intrigue before returning to their duties. Word spread through the hushed discourse of neighbors and kin. Curiosity compelled repeated glances toward the street where she labored in motion. What began as an isolated, personal episode steadily commanded wider attention. Hour by hour, the realization dawned. Something anomalous was fracturing the city's predictable rhythm. Those watching from doorways and windows could not grasp how history would later immortalize this moment. To them, Frau Troffea was not the herald of an enigma. She was a neighbor, a local figure acting in ways that defied comprehension. Residents sought clarity within their own experiences and beliefs. Some felt alarm, others confusion or skepticism. In those nascent hours, the event held no defined meaning, only a question silently crystallizing in the minds of the witnesses. As the hours waned, Frau Troffea remained in motion. What seemed a fleeting disturbance stretched into an endurance that defied logic. Residents returning to the site discovered her unchanged. Her persistence challenged the natural order. Usually, actions possess a discernible trajectory. A dispute settles, a crowd disperses, a traveler moves on. This, however, obeyed no familiar rhythm. The longer she moved, the more it eluded explanation. Observers watched from varying distances. Some lingered nearby, others peered from upper windows. From these vantage points, her movements appeared both repetitive and erratic. She pivoted and paced, devoid of any visible purpose. There were no goods to trade, no processions to join, and no celebrations to incite. The act existed in a vacuum, detached from the standard social anchors of public life. By dusk, the event dominated local discourse. Households parsed the day's sightings, seeking clarity in a void of understanding. Humanity instinctively demands rationale. Neighbors debated whether this was sickness, spiritual affliction, or something darker. In the absence of truth, speculation flourished. Each exchange added complexity to the burgeoning narrative, filling the silence where certainty should have been. The physical toll also drew focus. Sustained exertion in the summer heat demands immense energy. Despite visible signs of fatigue, she did not falter. This endurance transformed mild curiosity into dread. Observers were no longer watching a mere anomaly. They were witnessing a defiance of human limits. The question shifted from why she had begun to the far more haunting inquiry: why could she not stop? As darkness claimed Strasbourg, the mystery deepened. Streets emptied and commerce ceased, but the memory of the day remained, festering in private thoughts. Within the city, focus remained locked upon a woman whose actions defied interpretation. It remained a solitary episode, yet the atmosphere had shifted. What began as an isolated curiosity was surreptitiously evolving into a broader, more pervasive concern. Morning arrived, yet the strange vigil persisted. Most had assumed fatigue would inevitably halt the display. Instead, they returned to find Frau Troffea still in motion. The spectacle now carried a gravity absent the day before. Curiosity was fast surrendering to a profound, unsettling sense of permanence. What had seemed a fleeting anomaly was beginning to endure. Public reactions fractured. Some approached with clinical concern, seeking to diagnose her condition. Others maintained a distance, observing from the periphery while forming their own grim conclusions. Many simply avoided the scene, deeming it a matter beyond their concern. Human responses to the inexplicable are rarely uniform. Each witness, burdened by their own beliefs, viewed the same event yet found different truths, none of which resolved the enigma. Frau Troffea remained the focal point, yet her internal reality stayed obscured. Historical records yield only fragments, leaving her perspective forever inaccessible. Witnesses observed the physical strain, but her thoughts remained beyond their reach. This void between action and intent deepened the mystery. Neighbors could recount what they saw, but observation proved insufficient to uncover the cause. The motion was tangible, the meaning was elusive. As word rippled through Strasbourg, the narrative transcended its immediate locale. Those who had not seen her heard tales from kin and associates. Each retelling carried the story into the city's deeper recesses. Some remained skeptical, others felt compelled to verify the report for themselves. Information flowed through the informal network of the streets, creating a tightening web of focus that expanded with every passing day. The infancy of this phenomenon remains haunting. No frantic crowds had gathered, no plague had yet ignited. The city had not tipped into official intervention. Strasbourg existed in a delicate, quiet state of suspension. A solitary woman continued to dance, while the populace wrestled with the unknown. The scale was intimate, almost fragile. Viewed across 5 centuries, history often appears inevitable. For those living through these first days, however, the future remained entirely unwritten. By the 3rd day, the persistence of the dancing defied dismissal. Strasbourg thrived on predictable rhythms, laborers returning home, markets shuttering, exhaustion yielding to rest. Frau Troffea's ordeal dismantled these expectations. Each passing hour compounded the confusion, transmuting a singular event into an inscrutable phenomenon that transcended the bounds of ordinary experience. Repeated encounters revealed the toll on her frame. Sustained exertion stripped away composure, garments disheveled, movements grew erratic, and the markers of intense strain became unmistakable. Yet, her momentum remained unyielding. Observers witnessed a harrowing dichotomy, the body signaling collapse while the dance persisted. These contradictions fueled deeper speculation among those struggling to reconcile the sight before them. Discourse within homes and public squares intensified. What began as a fleeting observation now fueled exhaustive debate. Witnesses cross-referenced sightings, weighing physical theories against the spiritual frameworks defining 16th century life. In an era where the mundane and the metaphysical were inextricably linked, such behavior invited myriad interpretations. Certainty remained elusive, but the inquiry deepened. The city itself became an unsettling backdrop. Familiar streets harbored an encroaching, unpredictable element. Even when out of sight, the knowledge of her ordeal persisted. A merchant or craftsman at his trade might pause, haunted by the thought that she was still moving. Thus, the event carved a quiet, persistent niche within the collective consciousness of the community. The simplicity of this stage remains its most striking feature. There were no declarations, no immediate solutions. only the silent spread of uncertainty through the city. One woman acted in defiance of logic, and Strasbourg, in turn, shifted its focus. The mystery resisted resolution, yet its weight became impossible to ignore. The city began to grasp a grim truth. This was no fleeting incident. Something complex was unfolding, though its nature remained terrifyingly undefined. As days lengthened, Frau Troffea's dance hardened into a fixture of the Strasbourg landscape. Those fueled by rumors arrived to witness the spectacle. Regulars returned to measure the passage of time against their own memories. The event drifted from the periphery of public consciousness toward its epicenter. Yet, despite mounting scrutiny, the core mystery remained impenetrable. The movement was visible, but the cause stayed shrouded in silence. The dynamic between the woman and the city shifted. Once a solitary figure performing in a bustling arena, she now compelled the environment to react. Her narrative permeated every thoroughfare. Neighbors traded observations. Residents recalibrated their routes to pass her station. Unintentionally, she became the nexus of collective focus, her kinetic struggle dictating the behavior of those who never uttered a word to her. We often misinterpret historical enigmas as inherently explosive. In reality, they simmer in the quietude of human observation. The populace watched, debated, and waited, clawing for patterns. They anticipated recovery. They expected the collapse of exhaustion. Day after day, these rational outcomes failed to materialize. The mystery deepened not through sudden upheaval, but through the haunting absence of the expected conclusion. Frau Troffea's experience remained confined to the fragility of a single body. History grants us only fragments, leaving her internal sensations buried in the past. We are left with the stark contrast between one individual and the bewilderment of a community. As neighbors grasped for meaning, she remained the pivot of a narrative no one could articulate. The chasm between witness and truth widened with every passing hour. Strasbourg settled into a state of trepidation. The city acknowledged that this was no passing anomaly. Yet, the crescendo remained distant. The masses of dancers had not yet descended, and the contagion lay in wait. For now, the story belonged to one woman navigating the summer heat. Her solitary rhythm hung over the city, a silent inquiry, waiting for the shadows of history to reveal what would follow. The silence of one, the whispers of many. The anomaly transforms into an inescapable tide. The landscape of Strasbourg shifted, stripped of its former familiarity. Frau Troffea no longer danced in isolation. Across the streets, others emerged, ordinary townspeople, young and old, joining the strange cadence. They were a fragmented assembly rather than a unified collective, yet their presence redefined the public square, etching a pattern into the city that defied precedent. For those traversing the city, the atmosphere turned increasingly surreal. Familiar noise persisted, yet the rhythmic intrusion of multiple dancers warped its perception. Conversations faltered. Footsteps merged with the relentless cadence of the afflicted. A quiet, pervasive curiosity rippled through markets and neighborhoods. Residents realized this was no longer a singular, dismissible anomaly, but a burgeoning phenomenon. As more participants joined, the dynamic evolved. The focus transitioned from one individual to a pattern. Every new dancer recalibrated the observer's understanding. What once appeared unique now seemed dangerously contagious. Small groups congregated, comparing observations and debating the shift. Strasbourg was adapting, forced to reconcile with a reality where a solitary incident had matured into a systemic feature of urban life. The significance of the event metastasized within the collective mind. A lone figure is an exception, a multitude demands reflection. Residents scoured for connections, seeking the invisible thread binding the dancers. Questions eclipsed answers. The growing collective forced citizens to abandon personal context and confront the possibility of an unfolding catastrophe. A heavy, quiet uncertainty descended upon the city as Strasbourg witnessed the expansion of its mystery. As the count of dancers escalated, Strasbourg's thoroughfares adopted a jarring new rhythm. Morning routines were no longer predictable. The familiar trade and travel were eclipsed by an alien compulsion. In pockets of the city, this inexplicable movement became the landscape itself. These individuals danced in isolation or clusters, devoid of celebration. Without festival adornment or formal procession, the act itself became the sole, harrowing event. Public response varied with the observer. Some approached with empathy, viewing the dancers as souls in distress. Others maintained a cautious distance. A few watched with morbid fascination, returning to track the unfolding crisis. Human curiosity intensifies in the absence of logic, and as the situation grew more anomalous, it commanded more attention, drawing citizens from their private lives into the public square. The participants emerged from the ordinary fabric of society. They were not outsiders, but residents, neighbors, merchants, and parishioners recognizable to their peers. This proximity made the phenomenon profoundly unsettling. The ordeal was not an external invasion, but an internal collapse, unfolding within the very heart of the community, rendering the mystery intensely personal for every witness. The visual impact intensified with each passing day. From a distance, clusters of motion broke the city's standard flow. The eye, inevitably drawn to these discordant movements, wandered from the mundane tasks of commerce. Dancers repurposed the city's infrastructure, transfiguring the character of streets and plazas. Familiar landmarks appeared alien when viewed through the prism of this encroaching enigma. Despite the swelling numbers, understanding remained stagnant. Observers could articulate what they saw, yet description provided no insight. The city faced an expansion of scale, not a revelation of truth. Answers stayed elusive as Strasbourg struggled to categorize the madness. The crowd grew, yet the catalyst remained shrouded, forever beyond the reach of those watching from doorways, markets, and the shadows of the summer streets. With each passing day, the dancing grew familiar, yet understanding remained elusive. Residents learned to map the activity, with some navigating toward the spectacle while others sought the sanctity of quieter streets. The phenomenon began to dictate movement across the city. The dancers were no longer passive objects of observation. Their presence was actively reshaping the public experience. The composition of the crowd defied prediction. Faces surged and receded. A neighbor glimpsed among the afflicted one day might vanish the next. This fluid state gave the event a mercurial character. It was not a static assembly with a defined purpose, but a living, evolving entity within Strasbourg's social fabric, constantly pushing against its own boundaries. Observers fixated on minute details, the haunting expression of a dancer, the fraying of clothes after hours of relentless exertion. Such fragments offered no solution, yet they provided the currency for endless speculation. Humanity instinctively hoards clues when faced with the unknown, and across the city, residents engaged in this meticulous, quiet audit of the crisis. The dancers forced strange interactions between strangers. Individuals who would otherwise remain silent found common ground in their bewilderment. Brief exchanges in markets and workshops bridged social divides, forging a collective curiosity. While interpretations clashed, The shared witness of the impossible bound the populace together in a singular, unsettling experience. Strasbourg had begun to coexist with the enigma. The dancers were now a fixture, grim reminders that the abnormal had colonized the familiar. Commerce persisted, yet it unfolded alongside a growing, restless crowd that mocked every expectation. The city existed in a liminal state where the ordinary and the extraordinary occupied the same stone pathways, a haunting atmosphere defined by mounting questions and a movement that refused to cease. As the dancers multiplied, the phenomenon permeated Strasbourg's collective consciousness. It was no longer confined to the fringes of public interest. It dominated discourse. Whether discussing trade, weather, or faith, residents invariably returned to the dancers. Information no longer required effort to obtain. It circulated through the city's arteries, carried by neighbors, and the inescapable evidence of the streets. The growing crowd introduced a jarring visual dichotomy. Commerce persisted. Merchants displayed wares, laborers hauled cargo, and children navigated the lanes. Amidst this mundane industry, the dancers maintained their relentless, purposeless motion. The contrast was stark. While most citizens labored toward clear, logical ends, the afflicted appeared trapped in an endurance test that defied all human metrics. For persistent observers, the boundary between the extraordinary and the familiar began to erode. Human adaptability is potent. What once halted onlookers in shock now drew only a tempered gaze. Curiosity curdled into routine. The enigma remained, yet the response evolved, weaving the impossible into the texture of daily life without diminishing its capacity to haunt. Simultaneously, the emotional climate darkened. Initial wonder surrendered to deepening concern. The scale of the phenomenon suggested no abatement. It was gaining momentum. Citizens could quantify the growth of the crowd, yet remained blind to its catalyst. In this void of explanation, dread took root, and Strasbourg descended into an era where uncertainty became the city's constant companion. In retrospect, this transition was pivotal. The city was no longer observing isolated figures. It faced a singular, expanding entity. Residents could document the movement, but the underlying forces remained occult. Strasbourg found itself in the unsettling position of witnessing a public catastrophe while remaining ignorant of its cause. The crowd swelled, and with it, the pervasive sense that the city was drifting toward an abyss. By now, the dancers dominated Strasbourg's discourse. Their presence transcended mere geography, permeating the collective psyche. Whether through overheard market chatter, neighborhood gossip, or dinner table accounts, the news propagated relentlessly. The event evolved not just through the physical movement of the afflicted, but through the narrative web woven by the citizenry. The scene's true horror lay in its ordinariness. These were no performers or foreign wanderers. They were citizens whose lives had mirrored the city's own rhythms. This intimacy amplified the contrast. Observers recognized the faces, neighbors and acquaintances now stripped of their identities by the dance. The mystery did not manifest as a foreign curiosity, but as an infection blooming from within the community itself. As the crowd swelled, the energy of public spaces warped. Lines between participant and spectator dissolved. Witnesses stood silent, whispered in dread, or returned daily to track the unfolding tragedy like chapters in a grim chronicle. The phenomenon demanded scrutiny, yet offered no resolution. Every passing day added layers of detail, while the core truth remained agonizingly absent. Time altered perception. Early reports emphasized shock. Later accounts highlighted scale. The event's significance shifted from the individual to the collective. Residents gauge the crisis not by statistics, but by the weight of their own memories, noting the expansion of the crowd with growing unease. This growth possessed a momentum of its own, extending far beyond the physical act of dancing. As this chapter closes, Strasbourg confronts an enigma that has outstripped its origins. A solitary figure has become a legion, a personal tragedy, a public catastrophe. Yet, clarity remains absent. The dancers continue their relentless path through the summer heat, visible to all. Around them, the city persists, markets open, bells toll, life continues. Amidst this mundane backdrop, the growing crowd moves beneath the sun, transforming a local occurrence into an enduring stain upon history. A chilling realization begins to dawn on the observers. If the city's own rhythm can be so easily hijacked, what hope is there for those who haven't yet felt the urge to join the dance? The next part is coming in just 48 hours.